Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dave, and welcome back to Theology Thursday. Last week was a sensitive topic, Dave, and Dave does all the research for these Theology Thursdays for me, and you did a great job, handling a very sensitive topic in a really sensitive way. So
Today's is pretty sensitive as well. It sort of follows on, really.
This is a very topical thing as well at the moment, as laws are beginning to be changed in regard to this this subject. So what are we going to be talking about today, Dave?
Well, there's a couple of aspects of suicide that we didn't actually mention last time, and that's something such as assisted suicide, and one that is now legal in almost all states in Australia is physician-assisted death, or PAD. And sometimes this is a form of suicide, and sometimes the decision is made by someone else, and it's a provision of an easy and painless death to somebody who's suffering an incurable or extremely painful sickness. And so the choice there is sometimes made by family members, and they just call that euthanasia.
So today we're going to be talking about euthanasia, and hopefully there's many arguments on all the different sides regarding this, but we want to talk about the theology behind why the Bible says what it says. We want to look at theology today, and so kick it off, Dave.
Okay, just a bit of background. There was a recent Gallup poll in the USA that found that 72% of the population think that doctors should be allowed to end a patient's life by some painless means if the patient and or his family request it. But in Australia, that figure is actually somewhere around 84%.
So think it's okay.
Think it's okay.
Think physician-assisted death is okay. Wow.
However, the question that confronts the Christian is simple: is euthanasia, or is assisted death, whether it's by a physician or some other person, is it ever morally right, biblically okay for the Christian?
Because we do hear, and it is a question that Christians are a little bit we're in the dark about, because what we hear from the secular media is that it's all about mercy and compassion, and we are people of compassion. The Christian is a compassionate person.
And some people call it mercy killing, don't they?
And like, there's this poor person who's in terrible suffering. There is no future in there, that to be spoken of unless there's a miracle in medicine. And so the most merciful and compassionate thing, especially if they want it, is to end their life. And it sounds so compassionate, it sounds so righteous. So what is it? What's the problem with Christians? Why don't we think it's okay?
Even in just the word itself, euthanasia, it's derived from the Greek word, and it's eu, which is good, so evangelism, good news, okay, so good, and thanatos, which is death. So it's translated as a good death, which is why it's sometimes called mercy killing. So when any person, especially a family member or close friend, is experiencing extreme pain, maybe severe mental degradation or other extreme medical condition, our instinct is just natural to want to find some way of relief for the person in any way that we can. And sometimes this desire to help our loved one, it can become so strong in the caregiver or even the patient themselves sometimes, that it overrides the deeper impulse to preserve life and to survive. And there's even a record in the Bible of someone facing this situation. Job, he wanted to die during his time of intense suffering, and he even asked God to kill him rather than to allow the pain to continue. Job said, "I would rather be strangled, rather die than suffer like this. I hate my life and I don't want to go on living. Oh, leave me alone for my few remaining days." It's out of Job 7.
But I suppose people would retort there and say, well, hang on, Job wasn't in palliative care. He wasn't so sick and have a terminal illness, or and we know the end of the story. Of course, his life did improve. It did come good. And so once again, an unbeliever or somebody who hasn't read the Bible, who doesn't understand the theology behind it, would say, what is wrong with you people? Why would you extend somebody's suffering? Why would you want that to happen? And that's where we have to understand the theology behind it.
And when, as I said, we look in the Bible, we find there was Job that did that.
Yeah.
Elijah, Saul, they asked for that as well.
Well, Saul, of course, actually did. He asked his armor bearer to kill him, assist me in my suicide. His armor bearer refused. In the book of 1 Samuel, his armor bearer refused, and so Saul fell on his own sword and did commit suicide. And his armor bearer followed quickly behind him because he was so distraught. But there was, as you said, there's an example of assisted suicide for sure.
But before going too far down this path and looking at the issue, I would like to draw a line of distinction between two types of euthanasia, so-called.
Yeah.
There's active and passive euthanasia. And active euthanasia is where something is done to or given to the person to cause their life to end. So death is by what we might call unnatural means, whereas passive euthanasia is when artificial life support is withdrawn, allowing the person to follow the natural course and to die naturally. And whilst some would see these as the same thing, but morally they're very, very distinctly different actions. We'll look at active euthanasia in a moment, but let's just deal with passive first. It is, as we've previously noted, the withdrawal of life support, so switching off the machine. I'm sure Peter, you've been asked more than one time in ministry, as I have.
Absolutely.
With families saying, is it okay to turn off the machine? And when we do that, we allow nature to take its course, or to put it another way, we are leaving life in God's hands, and if they are to die, we will allow that to happen naturally.
And of course, most of these technologies are very recent anyway. They're all been developed over the last 50 years or so. So, in any other period of history, this wouldn't have even been a question. So,
but it's still an emotive time. It's an emotional time. Can I,
if I switch the machine off, am I responsible for my loved one's death? And the answer is a resounding no. You're not responsible for their death. In fact, passive euthanasia is not euthanasia at all.
I agree with that. I've walked a number of families through, as you would have, but in one case, it wasn't just walking a family through it was a very close friend. In fact, he was my youth pastor. And it was a very tough call. Can we turn off the machine? But it was the right call. And I've also seen where artificial life support is turned off so nature can run its course, and then the body has fought naturally.
Miracle happens.
With no artificial aid, as it had been doing, and the person recovered. So for me, I guess the most amazing was a premature baby who the doctors said could never survive, and even if he did, he would remain at best in a vegetative state. I've never seen a child so small. I've got a small hand, but he could have fitted in my hand. And the machines ultimately were turned off, but the baby not only survived, but survived to lead a normal life.
Wow.
So turning off the machine, the artificial life support, is not terminating life. It is simply allowing nature to run its course. And whatever that's going to be, totally in God's hand without any interference by man. That doesn't make the decision to turn a machine off an easy decision. But from a moral perspective, we are not intentionally taking a life. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
And as you said, there's a lot of people who agree with you, Peter, that it's not really euthanasia. We call it euthanasia, but nothing is actually done to to take or to terminate the life.
Yeah.
So
I actually wonder if the euthanasia advocates are trying to label passive euthanasia as euthanasia in order to push their cause forward.
Yeah.
It makes them, it's always the same thing, you know, and it's not at all.
No.
It's not at all. If you know, if we withdraw life support, you know, then and the person passes away, that's not the same as injecting them with something or you know, actually adding something, doing something to kill that life.
And most Christian ethicists would agree with that. There's very few that would say that passive euthanasia is unacceptable.
Yeah.
You know, one that's close to that is palliation. You know,
Yeah.
if we give any more painkillers beyond this level, it will terminate the life. Should we continue? And yes, that's not euthanasia in my mind anyway. You know, we're trying to alleviate the pain and the stress. We're not trying to take the life. And I think it's that intention that is the line of demarcation.
When you have somebody who is not going to die, they are in discomfort. Their quality of life has been reduced significantly. They don't have the will to live, but they're not going to die. You know, they don't have you know, have a whatever that's going to cause their death, and you know, inject something into their life. You actually bring something in that's going to kill them. That is euthanasia.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to that issue of active euthanasia. And I guess there are two main categories of active euthanasia. First is sometimes called assisted suicide or physician-assisted suicide or physician-assisted suicide death, PAD, is the overreaching description when there's a doctor involved. And essentially a person seeking assisted suicide is wanting to euthanize themselves with the aid of another person to ensure that death is quick and painless. But the person seeking death is the one who actually initiates the process. They administer the drugs themselves when it's assisted suicide. And the motivation is generally to do with the alleviation or even avoidance of severe pain that a terminal illness may bring. Some people have wanted to terminate their lives while they are still happy and well, because
there's a movie coming out called Blackbird, and that's the synopsis of this movie, that this woman has a terminal illness, and there's 100% certainty of death, but she's still well, and she wants to be euthanized while she still has all of her facilities about her. And so they've actually made a movie about it, which is pro euthanasia, and you know, it's one of those propaganda sort of movies where they use our emotive reasoning and, oh, look, it sounds so reasonable, we should do this. But again, today as a Christian, we're looking at not the emotion behind it, but what does the Bible say?
So there's that category where it's assisted death, but then there's also the category where a doctor or some other person actually administers the means of terminating life, but they're both called euthanasia.
Sure.
So that the question that we have to face is this: do we have the right to take either our own or another person's life? That's the ethical dilemma. No one wants to suffer or see a loved one suffering. And with advances in medical care, doctors can usually provide palliative care that substantially mitigates or lessens the suffering associated with terminal conditions. But even when they're being assisted, even when they're palliated, it's still difficult to see a loved one suffer great pain that we know is ultimately going to result in death. And for me, this is not just a theory either, because my mother died of cancer and I had to see the suffering.
So did mine. Yeah, my mother did too.
And it's hard. It's so hard to watch. And in the course of ministry, we both would have sat with people who were nearing death and faced great pain. And no one enjoys suffering or watching someone suffer. But does that make it right to determine when a person should die?
I would say no, it doesn't. So what does the Bible tell us?
The biblical view is that God alone is the giver of life, and that death is inescapable for all of it. It is our common destiny. The Bible says in Hebrews 9, it is appointed for men to die once, and after that, the judgment. So that is the natural thing for all of humanity. And Christians are confident that what happens to them after death is protected through the grace of Christ. So we understand that.
So there's many Bible verses, of course. That one from Job chapter 12 that says, in his hand, in God's hand, is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind.
I think it's also important that we understand that the Bible teaches us that human life is not the same as any other life on earth. Human life possesses an intrinsic dignity and value because every one of us are actually made in the image of God, and for the distinctive destiny of sharing in God's own life. And so all human beings have lives that are set apart from every other animal, possessing
100%.
a unique capacity for rational existence that enables us to see what is good and to want what is good. And human lives are of special value to God, so much so that God gave his own Son to redeem it.
John 3:16.
Yeah, he so loved the world.
And I think that's at the core of the biblical Christian argument against euthanasia, is that we are in the image, we are made in the image of God. We're not an animal, we're different. It's different to kill a human because of the sanctity of life and that the divine image that we carry. 1 Corinthians 6, Paul describes it like this: do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought with a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies, including till the very end, including your death. Honor God, that you are not your own anymore. It's not something that you have the right to take. So you ask that question, do we have the right? No, we don't. The Bible says God does.
There's a sense in which if we propose euthanasia for an individual, that we're judging that the current life of that individual is not worthwhile. And such a judgment is absolutely incompatible with recognising the worth and dignity of the person whose life is to be terminated. And as you said, being created in God's image. Nor should anyone ask for euthanasia for themselves, because no one has the right to see themselves, to value themselves as worthless.
Well, that's right. I think that's where the logic is flawed. That if a person's life is judged or is deemed to be worthless, you're actually judging that person's life by the quality of life. So if that's the case, at what point do you draw the line? Like, I'm not skiing in the Swiss Alps right now. My quality of life might be poor. I'm down here in Australia, COVID-19, and my quality of life isn't. I'm not on a mega yacht, and I don't have millions of dollars in the bank. So is the quality of my life not as good as the quality of that person's life? So at what point do you say your life is not worth
that's
as much
issue,
as that person? Now, I know that's a silly example, but if you then take it to the actual logic that people might use, so if a person is in some way disabled, is their life valuable? Okay, what if they can't speak? What if they can't hear? What if they, if somebody is blind, is their life less valuable than yours because you can? Or then you take it down to, what if they can't move? Is their life valuable? And the Bible would say a resounding yes. Every life is inherently valuable. Every life, no matter what the quality of their life is, that life in and of itself is valuable. That's why when we talk about abortion, we say abortion is inherently wrong because the life of that fetus, there is life in that baby.
Life.
It's a human life. And it's made in the image of God, therefore it is sacred, so we do not have the right to take it, no matter what it is.
So all of life is God-given, and birth and death are part of the life process which God has created, and we should respect that. No human being has the authority to take the life of any innocent person, even if that person wants to die. God declared not only that life is a sacred gift from God, and you find that in Genesis, but he actually says that death is our enemy. 1 Corinthians 15, the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. And when given the choice between life and death, God said to Israel, choose life.
Absolutely.
So Christians believe that God is sovereign, and such a belief drives us to the conclusion that euthanasia and assisted suicide don't fit with God's plan. We know that physical death is inevitable. Psalm 89, there's lots of scriptures, but God alone is sovereign over how and when that death will occur. Job, again, towards the end of the book, Job said, I know you will bring me down to death, to the place appointed for all of the living. So he, even though he wanted to die, he still said, well, God's going to bring me there. So we understand that. Ecclesiastes 8 and verse 8 says, no man has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the day of his death.
That's a very strong one. It's it's one of those verses that when we're talking about this subject, that really encapsulates it in a nutshell, doesn't it?
And God has the final say over that. So euthanasia and assisted suicide may be seen as man's attempt to usurp the authority from God. If life is a sacred gift and only God should determine when it ends, if we interfere with that, then we're usurping God's role, and it's not our prerogative to do that. I totally I totally understand the desire to escape end-of-life suffering.
Absolutely.
But that does not make euthanasia acceptable. No matter how we dress it up, it's still taking a human life, whether it's our own or someone else's. There's absolutely nothing in the Bible that gives us the right to do that. God is the author of life, and we do not have the authority to write the last chapter. No. So once again, we're dealing with a really sensitive issue. And look, if the things that we're talking about have raised an issue for you, please contact us. Have a talk with us, because this is really an important issue. And if you're faced with that issue and you need some counsel, come and talk. It is a very, very difficult thing.
And I think too, if you are a Christian and are in a discussion or in a position to be in a discussion at even a higher level around this topic, just remind you that it is imperative that you communicate with love and compassion.
Yeah.
One of the things that that the secular world that are arguing for euthanasia, one of their arguments against the Christian argument is that is the compassion argument. What's wrong with you people? You're not compassionate. These people are suffering, and you're trying to extend their suffering. And we need to be seen and be actually compassionate towards these people's plight, and find solutions that are compassionate, but that don't require us, to condone the killing of somebody. So be compassionate, be loving, and as Dave said, if you need to talk through any of the topics that we cover here, particularly these more sensitive ones, please feel free to contact us. We'd love to chat with you, or call Lifeline or Beyond Blue.
And while we're at the end of this week's session, next week, of course, there'll be some Easter stuff. We might look at something like the resurrection. Did it happen?
Yes, good idea.
And look, if there's a topic that you'd like to hear discussed on Theological Thursday, please let us know. We'd be very pleased to hear from you.
Yeah.
And we can deal with some of those issues.
Yep, we love it. God bless you and have a great week.
Cheers.